Point 4 sculpture part 4, we're in casting. So casting is a complex way of working, and casting's been around a long time. We see it in the Greco-Roman culture quite a bit, and they're using bronze. You see in other cultures they'll use for jewelry and smaller metals. That's what we call small metals as well. But basically, you're heating the bronze up to a melting point, and then you're going to pour it. So in this case, the race warrior from 460 BC, this is the classical Greek statue, an imitation of that, done in bronze, and then he's got a little bit of the archaic era hair, but getting towards realism. He was found in 1972, 2,000 plus years later, because he had fallen out. He was part of a ship that had sunk. And so much of the bronze from the Greco-Roman era, specifically Roman bronzes, are not extant. They didn't survive. Extant or in situ are two Latin words that we use to describe works that have survived. In situ means that it's still in the same place. This is not in situ, but it is extant of the period and did not get melted down for weaponry in later years, only because it was in a shipwreck. And then we find it, and there's this gorgeous description of what Greco-Roman musculature looked like with our contrapposto posture, which is the uneven weight being on one leg more than another. This sort of tilting of the hips, the shoulders usually a little bit dropped. So there's sort of an S curve going down the body. Anyway, he is a bronze casting. He is hollow. And there's different ways to do bronze casting. You can do it solid or hollow. A long, lengthy thing to describe, so I'm going to kind of skip over that part of it. But it's an example of the lost wax method. So initially, this is mixed, probably made, of either wax or clay, and it was on an armature, and then it was cast into a sand and plaster mixture, and then the wax was burned away, and then the liquid molten bronze was poured in. So perfection of the human body, contrapposto figure, we talked about that, the S curve, the relaxed figure, found by scuba divers. There are things that get discovered all the time, especially in the Mediterranean with all that shipping. So this is a possible way that it was made, probable way. So there's an armature, usually a wood armature, and then it's covered in wax or clay. And then a casting, it would be finished. This is the finished one. Number 3 is finished. Then number 4 would be a cast would be put over it in plaster. Sometimes there's multiples. This may have been made out of more parts. This shows it as 2-part mold, but it could have been 10-part mold. We don't know because it's gone. I'm sure an expert could figure it out. And then this would be flipped upside down. It would be flipped upside down here, perhaps, and then it would be put in an oven. That's supposed to be heating elements, I guess. And then all of the wax is melted out. So all you have is a hollow form now with the edges of it, if that makes sense, that are still there. Then they pour in, now I would say where these holes are, it was probably poured in upside down where his feet are, more likely. But anyway, there's sprues and different pouring areas, and these would sometimes be air holes too. You got to plan all this out so that the molten bronze flows cleanly. And then this blue thing here, which we're saying is our plaster sand sort of mold, would be broken away here. So that, I feel like this is pretty descriptive. It's not perfect. So moving into our different materials, marble is a metamorphic stone. Hardwood is, wood. Plaster is sulfate of lime and gypsum as well. And then ceramic is clay, and beeswax would be a wax, and bronze is a metal. So when we go outside of these traditional sculptures like carving and bronze casting and carving wood and stone, then we get into some other things that can happen. So we're going beyond these conventional additive and subtractive techniques. We're going to get into earthworks, construction, assemblage, ready-mades, kinetic and light sculptures and installation. Sounds like a lot, but it'll be really straightforward. Earthworks is actually very popular in the Southwest, basically because there's open land where you can do these large pieces, and that there's not trees to cover over what you're doing, and there's less erosion and so on. So they're a collaboration of many artists and workers, and even that's true of large-scale sculpture. Like with bronze casting, you don't do that alone. That takes a lot of people, usually a half dozen to a dozen people, just to do a life-size bronze. I mean, you can do it on your own, but my gosh, it's going to take you forever, and it's very heavy. So artworks should represent a sense of harmony between nature and humanity. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Land art, earthworks, that is the same thing. This is an ancient piece. This is an earthwork that is ancient from 800 BC in the US of A, in Ohio. So there are these cultures that are no longer around to tell us exactly what they were thinking. But in this case, this almost 3,000-year-old piece in Ohio was discovered, and they discover more of these all the time. There's different kinds of radar that you can use to find them, and they find actually a lot of the pyramids for the Aztecs, Mayans, that kind of thing. They find them too in heavily forested areas. So you can see this was a heavily forested area at one point, and it would have been hard to see, but I'm not sure exactly how it was found. Probably to do with the fact that somebody had their farm nearby and were plowing through, and there could be some harder rock underneath here for this serpent mound, and they found it. And so anyway, made some connections and turned it into a park where people can view it. Now it's more easily viewed from the sky, so we're imagining that these types of sculptures were speaking to the gods, right? So, and this particular one was a great serpent mound. So there's a lot of these sort of heaped piles of earth and stone, and this particular one was in Ohio. So it's a snake with its mouth open ingesting an egg is kind of what we're thinking over here. See the egg shape? And there's the snake's mouth. Position and alignment suggests it was used for making solar observations. So a lot of these greater earthworks, including, but you would call it, I have trouble calling Stonehenge or earthwork. It doesn't exactly. It's a little bit toward architectural or sculptural. But anyway, Stonehenge, ancient things are solar and more astronomical, not astrological, but astronomical orientations of the sky and so on. Spiral jetty. So this is Robert Smithson, and unfortunately he passed away in the 70s scouting out a new location for another earthwork in a plane crash. So he makes spiral jetty, and in this case he is using a bulldozer from the Great Salt Lake that is in Utah, and he's taking boulders and so on from here, dumps it here, and then he comes back, dumps it here again, and so on and so on, and then builds up enough stuff. So he's kind of got this thing that goes all the way out here. So it looks like a jetty if you've seen one at the ocean, if you've ever gone to any kind of a an area where there's shipping and so on, or boats that are parked. Usually there's a jetty, but it isn't a spiral. It would just be a wall. So he's making an earthwork that is a spiral, which is an ancient symbol. We saw this here in our serpent mound. There's a spiral right here. So he's commenting on that in that way. He's connecting to the ancients, and he's altering this in just a non-intrusive way in terms of, there's no toxic chemicals happening here. He's not changing the landscape in terms of hurting the tides or the flow of animal life or what have you. By making this piece, but it's a large piece. Now, he's a minimalist, and it's going to tell you a little bit about that in the book, how this evolves out of minimalism and the sense that a lot of artists wanted to get out of the galleries and out into the world more. And the idea of getting back to the earth and making these large scale works, because there's a limit to how big you can make something in a gallery or even in a park in the city, so they're making these large pieces. So this is a natural shape that's found universally. Okay, and it changes. It does change. It was buried. It was underwater in Utah for a long time, and then we had some droughts, and it came back. And I'm not sure the status at this moment. You'll have to look. It's kind of remote. So construction, he's using a bunch of different varieties. It's a new idea, and construction itself, it uses a variety of methods. So when we have engineered materials, what means plastic and sheet metal, you can go to the store, you can even go to Home Depot, and I honestly, it was like, oh, do you want to get a gift certificate to an art, people will ask me this, do you want it for an art store? Now, I don't ever really go to an art store. I go to Home Depot. That's where I go for my materials. Because when sculptors work, they tend to use things like sheet metal or rebar or wood or things that are manufactured lumber. Okay, so they're starting to use stuff that is manufactured.